It is an honour, a real honour, to welcome Rory McGuire to the podcast today. How's your Saturday, buddy?
Yeah, not bad at all. How's yours going, David?
Good now that I'm speaking with you, mate. I'm so excited for this after hearing the snapshot of your story. We're recording this late in January, and I really want to get this episode out for one of the key events in the mental health calendar, which is Time to Talk Day. Besides hearing your powerful Genesis story, I also want to use this podcast to highlight you as a case study for championing the importance of talking. You said in your BBC The Social documentary that talking changed your life. So I want to promote this as an ideology for more people to repurpose, and I want you to highlight that. Do you think we can achieve that?
Yeah, absolutely. For me personally, I used to bottle everything up when I was younger, and I was going through a really hard time in my head. And it's only when I started to open up and talk about my experiences that's when I really felt the pressure was off and the weight was lifted, and I completely changed my life around. And I do credit talking about my experiences as being a major factor in that.
I love it, mate. I really do. I'm so grateful that I know you, but I'm aware that the listeners don't. You know that I take it back to day one with guests on this podcast, and I know all the interviews you do, you're so used to taking it back to day one. But Rory, I know your transformation is physically and mentally. So what do you see when you look in the mirror today in 2021?
When I look in the mirror, I've always seen the good traits that I have, but I used to really fixate on my facial birthmark, and it would always be a case I would think to myself, oh, well, I can see the good traits, but no one else can. All they see is the birthmark. That's all that they focus on. I was probably wrong to think that, but it's just the way that I felt at the time about my self-identity, I suppose. But now when I look in the mirror and I see my birthmark, it reminds me of the journey that I've been on to get where I am today, and it sort of keeps me humble. I can never stray too far away from my past experiences because I've always got this reminder on my face of where I've been.
That's so powerful, mate. And me and your other friends will see all the good traits that you have. I wish I was as tall as you to begin with. But as a foreshadow, mate, I want to use this podcast as a tool for me to use the art of shutting the fuck up, essentially. Your story is incredible and it needs to be heard itself on repeat, on repeat, on repeat. And the message that you present, mate, is much wider than the individual rare story that is yours. I think anyone, literally anyone, can pull and repurpose today's message because we are all categorically different and unique. So let's take it back to day one, mate. Tell me your story. When did you first know you were quote unquote different?
Right, back to day one. So I'm Rory. I recently turned 27, and I was born with a birthmark on my face, which is called a venous malformation. And basically all that is a gathering of extra veins confined to a particular part of the body. Mine's on my upper lip and right cheek. And it wasn't actually apparent at birth. It only became apparent, I think, maybe when I was around about a year old. My parents started to notice that my upper lip was noticeably larger than the bottom lip. Went to the doctors, got diagnosed as a venous malformation. And the nature of the birthmark is it grows with you until you stop growing. So as I got older, it grew bigger and bigger. And as I've told you before, when we went on a walk together, I had it fully removed when I was 4 through an operation, but it actually grew back and I couldn't have any further surgery on it until I was a lot older because it was still growing. But the first time that I really noticed that I was different was first day of primary one. My dad and my gran took me in, and I can remember this quite clearly. Going into the classroom, meeting all my new classmates for the first time, the people that I was going to grow through primary school with, and I remember a few of the other children sort of being very focused on me and, you know, tapping their parents and pointing at me and saying things to their parents. And I saw a couple of the parents sort of trying to turn their head away from me to stop looking at me, and then going over and having a little word with them. And I suppose, obviously, I was only 4.5 years old at the time, so I wasn't mentally prepared to fully compute that in my head. But I remember that is the first time that I noticed that there must be something about me that is different. So that was the first time I recognised that there was a difference.
And how did that stay with you? That first realization of feeling different. How did that stay with you throughout school?
Well, it became very difficult to deal with because at the time I hated being the centre of attention, and for many years, and even still, because I still look a little bit different, it's just something that I've accepted. I'm always going to be a little bit different to the norm in terms of how I look, but at one point in time I really couldn't deal with it, and going through school, you know, whatever room I went into, or if people hadn't seen me for the first time, it's not something you see very often as someone with a birthmark on their face. And I am the person that a lot of people know me for having a birthmark on my face. And as I got older through school, primary school was generally okay. But I know there are certain things in primary school that were sort of the foundation for the way that I ended up feeling in my late teens, in terms of looking different and people whispering behind my back and me walking past them, and you know, I'm just beyond, you know, I'm a few meters away from them, but I'm still within earshot, and I've heard them say something nasty about me, or I've heard them, oh, I wonder what happened to him, and you know, all these little incidents that were happening on a regular basis all built up into me really thinking, you know, I'm different. People are always going to look down on me. People are always going to prejudge me, and you know, that just manifested itself into pretty full-blown depression by the time I was about 17.
Wow. So at the age of 17, how were you? Was this the lowest of your lows? Did the microaggressions that were faced towards you have a snowball effect at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. All these little incidents, as I said, people, you know, pointing out my difference and making it apparent that I do have a difference. I mean, I was constantly looking for it. Wherever I went, I was always in the corner of my eye looking for someone staring at me, expecting someone to say something, expecting someone to stare at me. And by the time I was 17, I'd actually accepted the fact that, because at that time I'd started going for operations again. Like when I was 17, that was the first time I'd started going for operations since I was 4.
How many?
Because
How many operations have you had, Rory?
I've actually lost count, but I know it's somewhere around about 20
Wow.
operations. And I mean, one was when I was 4, and then the rest were between the age of 17 and 22. So there was a 5-year period there where I had a load of operations with a general anaesthetic every time. And by the time I was 17, I was going to be going into the first operation that I'd had since I was 4. And I had pretty much, no matter how much I love my family and my friends and all the rest of it, I'd pretty much accepted in my own head that if something were to go devastatingly wrong with the operation, and for example I was to die as a result of having the anaesthetic or what have you, which is rare, but I know it can happen, I'd pretty much accepted that wouldn't be the worst outcome, because then I wouldn't have to go through not only the prejudice but the battles within my own head, which were probably worse than the prejudice, because of the way that I doubted myself and I doubted my future. I didn't think I was ever going to be happy. Didn't think I was ever going to be confident. I didn't think I was ever going to be able to walk down the street or get on public transport without being consumed with anxiety, because I really, I mean, like, as I've told you before, a dentist waiting room or the doctor's waiting room, for example, that was like the worst thing that I could imagine. I was just consumed with anxiety as soon as I walked into a situation like that.
I'm so injected with perspective right now, Rory. And it's not even the first time I've heard that story about the battles that you faced in your head of tying your self-worth to the looks that you're given on the street and doubting your entire future and your job outcomes and your
Yeah,
perhaps maybe relationship outcomes and friendship outcomes because of
yeah,
the battles that are going on in your head. So that's how internally looked in your head. How did that reflect in
yeah.
your actions? Did you go out much?
No, not at all. There's a period between the ages of 17 and 23, I would say. I was pretty much a recluse. I was unemployed for about a year at one point because of the operations I was going through. I was then unemployed for another 9 months because I was having so many operations at such a quick rate that I would have an operation and there was a 2 to 3 week period of recovery at home. You know, it was hard to get a job with all that going on, and I knew that it would be a lot to ask of an employer to willingly, you know, tell them that I've got these operations, I'm going to be off for 3 weeks at a time. Not only that, I didn't even have the confidence to go to a job interview. And the interviews that I did go to at the time, again, I was just consumed with anxiety. And I didn't go out much at all. I play golf, so I would go out and play golf. But apart from that, I would stay in the house. And, you know, when I got to the age of 18 and my friends started going out and I was hearing about all their stories at the weekend and stuff, there's nothing that I wanted to do more than join them and go and have fun with them. But I couldn't bring myself to do it because the way I felt at the time, I knew that if I walked into a club or a restaurant or a pub or a bar, it was just going to be all eyes on me. And I really couldn't deal with it at the time. So even though most of my friends I've been friends with since I was really young, and I've made a lot of new friends in the past few years, but the ones that have known me since I was really young, there is a 4 or 5 year period where I don't have many memories with them because I wasn't going out with them and having fun. And I know that that could have affected friendships because, you know, they'd be used to seeing other people and not used to seeing me. And luckily, I'm still great friends with everyone I was friends with back then. And we've made new memories since then, and we've made up for lost time, I suppose you could put it. But, you know, it still sticks with me that there was 4 or 5 years where I just didn't leave the house, and it's tough. But again, going back to what I said earlier, it's good for me to reflect on the dark periods like that because it shows how far I've come now.
I'm reflecting on it now, Rory. I remember you told me that you spent your 21st birthday, the big pivotal birthday that even in America is like the gateway to freedom, the gateway to adulthood. You told me you spent that in your house upset and crying. And you told me just a couple of minutes ago that you couldn't go into nightclubs because you didn't want to be the center of attention. You didn't want to be known as the different guy in the room. But now you're this confident, ecstatic individual and you embrace being different or quote unquote different. Like that's what separates you from everyone else. But you say that you're the owner of a facial birthmark. But you really are right now the owner. You own that thing. It's amazing, mate. I'm so proud of you and so proud of that story. I'm actually getting a bit emotional.
Thanks, David.
And my gut, like, actually just hear, like, I've heard it 2 or 3 times now, and boy, has it moved me again for like the third time of hearing it. So, I mean, I'm just so proud of you, honestly. And I've only known you such a short period of time, but just one of my goals for 2021 is to become more empathetic because I suppress my emotions. And the way I wanted to cure that was by hearing perspective stories or struggles that I've not had to face myself. And mate, this is the biggest one yet. So thank you.
No problem at all. To touch on what you said about my 21st birthday, that was, I mean, I still remember it. I got up in the morning and my mum and dad were really happy that day. They were, you know, their son was turning 21. It was a big day. They presented me with this beautiful watch that I actually lost last year when I was drunk. But
When you were making up for lost time.
But yeah, exactly. So yeah, they presented me with this watch, and I was so depressed, and I sat down on the sofa and I got presented with this watch, and they were really happy, and they could see that something was wrong because I just wasn't reciprocating the energy they were giving me, basically. And I sat for an hour and a half on the couch crying, an hour and a half, because it felt to me that I'd reached the age of 21, which is seen, as you say, it's like a pivotal moment, it's a milestone. And I was still going through all the feelings that I'd faced since I was 5 years old, and probably in a much bigger way, because the more time went on with me feeling that way, the more I couldn't see light at the end of the tunnel. And I always kept a glimmer of hope, and it's a little glimmer of hope that I always kept in the back of my head. You just need to keep going, be patient, because it is going to come to fruition, that you're going to get through this. But when I was 21, I'd been going through it for that long. I was just fed up, and I was 21, wasn't going out to nightclubs, wasn't seeing my friends that much. Was very depressed, didn't know what was going to happen in the future, didn't know if I was ever going to be happy or confident. And, on a birthday that's as important as your 21st, it was a really heartbreaking day for me. But again, an important day in my story to show how far that I've come.
It really is, mate. I think that is the lowest of your lows, by the sounds of things. How did you overcome it?
Well, there's two main things, right? One of them absolutely is the way that I started to open up about my experiences. And I've told you before, when I was 22, I put a post on Facebook, and I can't even fully remember the motivation behind doing that, but it was something along the lines of me thinking to myself, enough's enough. If I speak about my experiences, then maybe not only will it be cathartic for me, but my experiences might be able to help someone else. So I put this post on Facebook, and it had like a collage of me throughout the years and how my face had changed and what the birthmark looks like now or at the time. And I wrote a lot of things about my experiences. I wrote about, sometimes children would be scared of my appearance when they saw me, and how that made me feel. And just the confidence issues, the body confidence issues, and it got shared worldwide. People started messaging me saying I was very brave and courageous to say those things, and that my words had inspired and helped them. I said a lot of things that not even my mum and dad knew, and I said a lot of things my friends didn't know, and it felt really good to get it off my chest. And that's been the biggest factor in changing my life around, definitely, is starting to speak about things. The other thing is getting the majority of my birthmark removed. That along with speaking about my experiences has helped me massively. But the funny thing is, now that I look back on it, I think that I could have reached the point I'm at now without having any surgery at all. I have had the surgery, but I do think that I could have reached this point without having it. And I've been offered further surgery to make my face completely symmetrical. And I've had surgeons saying to me before, look, we can quote unquote finish the job and no one will ever know you've had a birthmark, all the rest of it. I've turned it down. Because I'm happy the way that I am. And in a really big turn of events, I like the fact that I've got a birthmark on my face. And if you'd asked me 3 or 4 years ago, that would be the furthest thing from that would have been the furthest thing that I could ever believe about myself, that I would say something like that. But now, as you say, I own it, and I'm happy that I've got it. And I know that no matter how hard the experiences were that I went through and how much I missed out on as a teenager and a man in his early 20s, I'm glad that I went through it at the time, because I might have been someone completely different if I hadn't. And I think it's given me sort of power to help other people.
Mate, you're the absolute paragon of bravery and courageous. And after hearing that mic dropping moment, my brain's playing thought pinball of what to ask you next, because there's just so much warmth and so much authenticity there that I just want to get it all out there at once. But I guess what I want to ask is, we speak about this big surgery that you had in 2016, right?
Yeah.
And that was the most pivotal surgery that you had to move the large extent of the tissue.
Mm-hmm.
Where you said when we went this walk that you said what you just said there, that you think you could have reached that point of confidence without having that surgery. But in your mind at that moment in time, that was a tick box. That was like the gateway for your happiness, you thought in your own head. You thought I
Yeah,
can.
that's a good way to put it. Gateway to happiness. That is, for many years, the only thing I wanted was that surgery that I had in 2016. That was what I was waiting on since I was 4 or 5 years old until the age of 22. I'd been waiting years and years and years for that surgery to be possible, and then it was possible.
But the fact is that like you said, you could have been confident without it, but there was a mental block in your head that said, I
Uh-huh.
need to get that no
Yeah.
matter what. That was your North Star, not a career,
Mm-hmm.
not anything else. It was just that one surgery, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That was your glimmer of hope.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, that, when I talk about the glimmer of hope, I am talking about that surgery, basically. And it's something that I'd wanted done. Something that I've said before, it's maybe not fully, you'll maybe be able to take something from this, but basically, my dream at the time was something that the majority of people are born with. You know, like what my dream was to be able to walk down the street and not feel anxious, be able to go places without feeling any sort of way towards my identity. And, you know, most people are born with that. Most people, obviously, there's a lot of people that don't have those certain traits, but most people are born into a situation where they're not having to be singled out the way that I was, I suppose. And it was my dream to be able to go down the street and not have anyone look at me. And when I put it that way in my own head, it's quite powerful to myself, because it's, you know, like, imagine your dream is something that everyone else is born into. And that's the way that I felt at the time.
Mate, that is so moving. I'm so glad we realized that together, and you realized that. I remember you told me that there was a TV program that wanted your involvement.
Uh-huh.
And I think what you just said there was thematic through your choice to go onto that TV program that never went to air. Can you speak about that?
Yeah, so it was a prime time television show a couple of years ago that the producer wanted me for it. I went through basically an audition and then all sorts of forms and stuff like that. It was going to be prime time on a big channel with a very well-known presenter, and the premise of the show was that people who want to have some sort of appearance-based surgery, whether it be implants or facelift or what have you, they would come and basically present their case to a panel, and they wanted me on the panel as one of the sort of judges, I suppose you would say. And they would present their case to the panel, and then the panel had to decide whether or not they should have the surgery. And if the majority said yes, the TV channel was then going to sorry, the TV channel was then going to pay for the surgery. Now, the premise of that, to me, it's not a great concept. I don't really agree with the concept at all, but the reason that I was interested in it was because I knew it was a big platform where I could voice my own experiences, and there'd be people watching at home, or indeed the contestants on the show might be able to listen to what I've been through in terms of surgery and confidence issues and stuff like that. And they might say to themselves, you know what, I don't need surgery. You know, he's helped me to realise that I don't need to change my appearance. I look fine the way that I am. And that's the reason I wanted to be involved in the show. And as you say, it never went to air. But there's a couple of things that it's not necessarily the best fit for me, but I know that my experiences will hold more weight than what the premise is, if you know what I mean.
I
And
love
that's what got me interested in that one.
I love that. And essentially what you spoke about before, about your North Star, your dream being just to look normal, to fit in, to look like the same as everyone else. If you took that message to that panel where people were going into the jury or into the fake court to to display their case for cosmetic surgery. I think if they heard that message of you just wanting to fit in, when these people who are on that program, the contestants as such, already fit in, I think that message would have landed so well, despite of the kind of backlash of the premise of the program itself. So we're speaking about
that
TV
was
here.
my thinking.
Exactly, mate. We're speaking about TV here, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, you almost made it to air on this TV program. You've been on TV on numerous occasions, but that is almost 17-year-old Rory's worst nightmare. When was your first interview, and what was it for, and how did you feel afterwards?
First interview was STV Live at 5. That was actually before I'd had the majority of my birthmark removed, but it was about a month after the initial Facebook post that I just told you about.
Mm-hmm.
And after that initial Facebook post, I really wasn't in a good place at all when I posted that. And then within a month of me posting that, my face was all over multiple national newspapers, and then this TV program wanted to interview me. And before I went in, it was 17-year-old Rory's worst nightmare, but there I was in the green room or what have you, and I couldn't stop walking. I was pacing up and down. My heart was going like a train. But funnily enough, as soon as the cameras were on me and I started to speak about my experiences, I mean, that first television interview that I did, when I watched that back, that is the first time that I ever displayed the same sort of confidence that I've got even more confidence now, but that was the first time that I'd ever really been proud of the way that I handled my situation, because the confidence I displayed without any anxiousness on display or whatever it was inspiring even for myself. And it is something, it's an interview that I watch now and again, maybe when I'm reflecting on the past and stuff, and I'll look at that and I'll think, good on you.
Oh, I love that. So we spoke about that pivotal Facebook post, and the facial birthmark was almost taboo before then. Do you think it was the elephant in the room, and the fact that you addressed that became a catalyst for further campaigning and further advocacy?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good way to put it. As I said, before that initial Facebook post, which is only about 5 years ago, before that, I didn't talk about my birthmark at all. Because I didn't want it to be the centre of attention, I sort of tried to talk about it as little as possible. And whenever anyone brought it up, like my heart would start to race immediately, because I really did not want to talk about that subject at all. Because I bottled everything up at the time. And as you say, it was like the elephant in the room. So there's obviously people have asked about it countless times over the years, but whenever someone did ask about it at that age, I hated it, and I automatically got butterflies every time. Whenever anyone said, what's wrong with your face, is one of the main questions that I've had over the years. It's probably the main question that I've had over the years. What's wrong with your face? And I would get butterflies every time straight away. And now when people ask about it, I'm happy to talk about it. And my life is that when I talk about my younger life, everything that I felt then is the opposite now. It's a complete 180-degree turn, is what my life has done. And I'd rather talk about it now than bottle it up. And I'd rather it was out in the open than bottle it up. And again, for 17-year-old Rory to think that way is mind-blowing, because I would never have thought that way at that age. And now I very much do, and I'm in a much better place now.
Mate, I'm so proud of you, and the synchronicity of this podcast and the mental health calendar event, Time to Talk, is absolutely paralleled. For you, that was really time for you to talk. You needed to talk at that moment in time.
Yeah, I think I did. I don't know what happened in my head at that point that I decided to start talking about it, but I noticed that I was going down a dark path. Not that I was doing drugs or anything like that, but I noticed that in my own head I was just getting lower and lower and lower, and I couldn't see an end goal in sight, basically. And it was as if the only thing I could do at the time was tell my story and hope that it helped. And if it didn't help, then I might have still been kept in that cycle for a bit longer. But it helped way beyond how I thought it would have helped. and that really spurred me on to continue telling my story.
I really hope that gives the listeners a fresh perspective on the importance of talking. And I hope people who are struggling that are listening to this and are bottling things up do feel the need and feel the energy that comes from Rory's story to go on and talk, whether it's within their friend group or their family, or much wider like Rory has. So you've been on that journey of posting that very first initial Facebook, for it to go viral, to then go on to your first TV appearance. What was after that? What other appearances have you done?
I've done quite a few. Television, I've done Sky News, BBC, Channel 5 a few times, STV. Just any network you can think of in Britain, basically. I've done a chat show on Sky. I got interviewed for a chat show on Sky. I've done quite a lot of different things, and for me to think that I would ever be doing that again is absolutely mind-blowing, but I enjoy it now. I really enjoy it. And I've actually said before, which is another mental thing for me to say, like just another mind-blowing thing, is that there's probably no situation that I'm more confident in than when someone's interviewing me on television. Like I've noticed myself that when I'm on television being interviewed, I thrive off it. I absolutely buzz off it, and I love it. And it's there's hardly any photographs exist of me as a teenager, because I used to not want my photograph taken under any circumstances. I didn't even used to go to a lot of family events in public places because I knew that photographs were going to be taken. I would stay in the house, and my mum and dad might go along, and they would try and entice me to go, but there's a lot of family things I missed out on because I just didn't have the confidence to be in those public places. And the fact that for someone that used to hate being photographed so deeply hated it, for me to think that there's no situation I'm more confident in than being in front of a camera, in front of potentially millions on some of these shows, that's, again, it shows me how far that I've come. And I always remain humble because I always remember where I've been. I've been through a lot of traumatic stuff. It's never going to, it'll never be taken away from me. Like I can't forget what happened, but it's still very much in the back of my head a lot of the time. But it makes me more proud of myself that I've been able to get to this point.
Rory, one of my favourite online features of you is your speech at the No to Hate Crime Awards in 2018.
Oh yeah,
I love that video. You looked very handsome in your kilt.
Thanks.
You welled up when you gave that speech, mate. You were really, really emotional. Why did that mean so much to you?
I was very emotional that night. The No to Hate Crime Awards that year, I won an award called the Young Upstander of the Year. And that was because I was the face of a hate crime campaign at a charity called Changing Faces that I'm a champion for. They ran a hate crime campaign that year, which I was one of the main faces of. And off the back of that, there's a lot of other stuff that I did that year. Then I got put forward for this award and I won. And there was about 350 people in the room down in central London. And for me, it just felt like I had been struggling for my whole life up to that point, dealing with all sorts of different negative emotions, stuff that I would never want anyone to have to deal with. Really, really, really negative feelings and emotions in my head. And I'd got through the other side of it. I'd had this surgery, all the rest of it. And then I'd started to really speak about my experiences on a sort of a bigger platforms. And for me to be commended for what I went through for all those years and then be given an award to show that people cared about what I had to say and to show that people didn't just see me as the guy with the birthmark on his face, they saw me as a guy with an inspirational story. That meant the world to me. And I did. I absolutely broke down on stage. And yes, it felt like I'd been fighting for so many years without any sort of commendation from anyone. That's just the way that I felt. And I'm sure there's lots of people looked at me over the years and thought, he's a really brave guy to go about with that birthmark or what have you. But they maybe didn't say that to me. So it was still in my head that I hadn't really been commended for it. And then to have this award given to me on the big stage and all the rest of it, it felt like a victory after fighting a battle for many years.
Wow. Oh, mate. To deconstruct that, it's just fucking crazy, mate. Like, you're on stage for a starter, which was, like we said, 17-year-old Rory's worst fucking nightmare. You're on a fucking stage in front of 3 people, showing your face, accepting an award for campaigns that included you showing your face and the story that came with it.
Mm-hmm.
That sentence itself is a transformation. I'm just so proud of you. I hope you do reflect on it.
Thank you. Yeah, I do. It's as I say, it's always in the back of my head where I've been in the past because it's my story. My social development was actually held back because the age of 17 to 22, that's a very important part of your life. And for me, I wasn't doing the things that 17 to 22-year-olds normally do. I wasn't going out and I wasn't really socialising. I was spending a lot of time on my own in my bedroom. And, that'll affect anyone, especially at that age.
Well, we learn in classrooms and in the workplace by osmosis, by just watching other people do things. And even social skills fall into that bucket. You would probably have lost out in social skills, how to interact with potential partners and how to interact with new friends, how to be introduced to new groups, how to interact with people in public. Because you didn't.
I used to hate meeting new people. Like, meeting new people was one of the worst things that I could think of. And again, everything that I felt back then, I feel the opposite now. I love meeting new people now. And I'm very outgoing and, I socialise a lot under normal circumstances, obviously. But yeah, it's a complete 180-degree turn that I've done. And I want to show people that no matter how low you're feeling at the moment, I've been able to do a complete 180, and so can you.
I love that, mate. We spoke about your No to Hate Crime awards being a victory in the sense that you weren't just known as Rory with the birthmark. You were known as Rory the advocate. I know the answer to this next question, right? Do you think you subconsciously only do the campaigning to be known and recognised as more than Rory with the facial birthmark? You don't want to be known as completely that and that's all you're worth? Or do you campaign and advocate because you truly, truly stand for the cause? I think the latter.
Yeah, definitely the latter. I've read stories about children in the past, like these online stories you see and stuff like that about children that are going through similar situations to what I went through. I remember reading one on a train when I lived in Kent for over a year, and I remember reading one on a train one day about like an 11-year-old boy that was getting bullied at school because of the way that he looked, and I started crying on the train reading it because it reminded me so much of how I felt at that age. And one of the main reasons that I do all this campaign sort of work is I don't want anyone to have to experience the things that I did at that age. I'm getting emotional talking about that. But yeah, that's a huge thing for me because what I went through right at the start of my life, nobody should have to. I was born into a situation where I was the underdog in every situation. I was the different one. I was the one that was having to fight, and not physically fight, but I was having to not only fight off people's prejudices on me, but fight with all the stuff that was going on in my head. My head was all jumbled up, and for me to think that there's children going through that right now, and people that are going to grow up and maybe not get through it the way that I did, that's the biggest thing for me, is not only to help children that might be experiencing it, but adults as well, because there's adults older than me that are still going through the feelings that the 17-year-old me went through. And it's stuff that nobody should ever have to, where nobody gets to choose what they're going to look like when they're born. And I say this all the time, nobody should have to be prejudiced because of how they look or what their race or sexuality is or any other reason. Prejudice shouldn't be a thing.
Rory, I'm almost angry at myself that I don't have a big enough platform to share that message. I want so many people to hear that. I just wish I had a bigger following or whatever so people could hear it, because that's so important. And it's really humbling me to hear that, because I can completely resonate that there is definitely people out there going through what 17-year-old Rory went through, but they're in their 40s or 50s. And we spoke about when we went a walk that you're almost valued as the underdog off the bat. In social circumstances, your self-worth you thought was tied to how you looked. You always had the undercard. Even amongst your friends, that's just Rory with a birthmark. And even that moved me. I remember hearing that and I was just like, oh, imagine having to actually to think like that. Do you think it was important for you to go through what you've been through so you didn't become the person that would be prejudiced towards someone like you?
It's a very well-worded question. I have thought about that before. I've thought that, if I didn't have the birthmark, if I was completely symmetrical, if you like, I could have been a completely different person. The experiences I've gone through definitely have made me more empathetic and understanding of other people's situations. That's without doubt. I'm very empathetic and understanding towards other people's situations, and I think that when people talk to me about their own situations, they can see how understanding I am, because I don't throw judgment at anyone else, because I know what it's like to be judged. So the last thing that I want is to, have anyone think that I'm prejudicing them, because it's just something that I would never do. Whereas if I hadn't gone through the experiences of being on the receiving end of that, I might have been a completely different person. And I actually think that I'm probably, after having gone through those experiences, than I could have been.
I agree, mate. I really do. So,
because one thing is that I can, the way I felt when I was younger, I can only be humble. I didn't have any sort of reason to be cocky or arrogant or overconfident or anything like that. And I tried to remain as humble as possible because I know what I've been through. And I genuinely think that I could be nothing other than humble in most situations because of what I went through. So the humility that I've gained from it has been a big thing for me as well.
It's such a great trait, but at times you need to feel like the man, though. There is circumstances where you need to step up. Do you know what I mean, though? Like, sometimes you need to have that injection of confidence, maybe before an interview or before a first date or something.
Well, I've got the confidence, but I try and keep the humility as well, as much as possible.
So we spoke about the surgery in 2016, and we spoke about that you were given opportunities to finish the job, quote unquote, but you've refused them because, like we said, you fucking own having a facial birthmark. Do you think a lot of your identity is tied to it? See, when you had the surgery in 2016, did you ever feel like you lost part of yourself?
No, not at all. And I remember when I was about 16 and I was going to be going for my first operation since I was 4 was when I was 17, but I remember when I was 16 it first started to sort of get mooted. And one of my best friends, Craig, shout out to Craig, Craig McKinley, he said to me, he probably won't remember this, but I remember it, but I started talking about the fact I was going to be getting surgery done and stuff like that, and he said to me, but if you lose your birthmark, you won't be Rory anymore. And that, I remember thinking about that at the time. Obviously, I was a lot younger and more immature and stuff, but it sort of resonated with me and thought, yeah, my friends don't judge me. They see me as Rory, I'm just Rory that happens to have a birthmark. I'm not Rory with the birthmark, you know what I mean? But no, I've never personally felt like I've lost part of my identity, but when he said that, it sort of made me think about it at the time. But no, it's something that, even if I did have it fully removed, I would always remember what I've been through. The other thing that I've not mentioned this to you, and my friends probably don't know this either. There is a chance that my birthmark could recur. there's a chance that it could start to grow bigger again. Luckily, that's not happened, and I think it would have started to have done that by now if it was going to, but it is a chance with the type of birthmark that I have that it could sort of start to go back the way it was, sort of thing. And over the past few years, I've felt really conflicted about that, because on one hand, I know that if that were to happen, I'm probably a lot better equipped now to deal with it than I was back then. But on the other hand, if that were to happen, it would also feel in a way that I had been teased with like a few years of experience in my dream, and then having my dream taken away from me and having to go back to the way that I looked before, and potentially dealing with what could be even worse feelings than I did back then. Because back then I didn't have any sort of experience of walking down the street and not feeling anxious, or happily going out to nightclubs and stuff the way that I do now. I didn't have that experience to miss. But if it was to recur and if I was to have confidence issues again where I couldn't bring myself to do those things again, I might even deal with it worse than I did back then. And it's something that I've had to think about over the years, and I've never really said that to anyone.
That's a huge confliction, because at that time when you were in your early teens, you didn't know what you didn't know.
Yeah.
And excuse me if I'm being completely juvenile and completely unsympathetic here, but I think if that were to occur, it is all a mindset. It can be combated with a mindset. Would you agree on that, or do you think that's unsympathetic?
No, I would agree with that. Now, knowing what I know now, I would definitely agree with that. Touch wood, that doesn't happen. But yeah, as I say, I might be better equipped to deal with it if it was to happen. But part of me thinks, it would be like having your dream taken away from you. You know what I mean? If that makes sense, what I'm saying.
Well, I had that. I had my dream take away from me. My North Star was that I was going to create a lot of wealth and rid my mum of any financial stress. But my mum passed away, and that North Star was taken away from me overnight. I could not achieve that. No matter how successful I became, I couldn't provide my mum with that. And I know how that feels. That is the worst feeling in the world. That was just as hard as losing my mum itself.
Right.
And so, mate, if it does happen, it happens. But I think you've got the mental tool set and the mental resilience to overcome it this time. And mate, you've got me and you've got all your friends. So
yeah, exactly.
Let that happen. So
hopefully, as I say, hopefully it doesn't recur. I don't think it will, but it's always, there's a slight chance it could at some point start to grow again. And then another thing to add to that, at that point I would need to think to myself, do I want to have surgery again to remove a bit of it again? And, I would feel conflicted about that as well.
I think you would, mate.
But luckily hopefully I'll never need to cross that bridge.
Hopefully, but remember we spoke that big surgery that you had was that mental tick box. You've completed that tick box in your head. You realised that you could have been confident in everything that you are today before that surgery, but it was just a mental stigma that you had lingering in your brain. I think if it were to go back now, there is a great chance that you wouldn't get it, just because I now know you as a human and I know what you stand for. So after the big surgery that you had, if you didn't feel like your identity was taken away from you, how did you feel after surgery?
Well, I've described it to you before as like a honeymoon period. I came out that operating theatre. It was almost as if I'd been reborn. Like if you imagine like a calf being born, they come out of the womb and they're jumping about and they're all happy, seeing the world and everything. That was like me coming out the operating theatre, although I had less energy than that because I was out the game on morphine. But but yeah. So after an initial sort of recovery period, there was a 3 or 4 month recovery period at home, and they basically cut away a big part of my face. And when it was when I first came out of the operating theatre and I saw it in the mirror and stuff, I didn't know how it was going to recover because it was so, the trauma they'd done was, it was a great deal of trauma that inflicted on my face, basically. So I didn't know how it was going to recover. Then over the next 3 to 4 months at home, it was changing every day, and then I could see it taking shape. And then when it got to like the end of the recovery period, I was like, wow, you know, it's way more than what I'd imagined they would do with it. They've really far exceeded my expectations in terms of the work they've done with it. It's really amazing, you know, to look at it before and after. And then, yeah, I was ecstatic. It was like a honeymoon period, as I say. I was going out with no confidence issues. I was going down the street and not caring what people thought and stuff like that. But another thing was that there were certain quirks that I had when I was younger that I noticed took probably about a year and a half post-surgery for me to get rid of. Because I was, even though my mindset had changed and my appearance had completely changed, I was still going down the street expecting people to stare at me, expecting people to look at me. Because if you think about it, for 22 years before that, that's what I was used to. And then suddenly, almost overnight, it wasn't happening, but I was still expecting it to happen because does that make sense?
100%.
I was expecting all these things to happen and they just weren't. And there's part of me that when it didn't happen, I was like, you know, that I was actually quite confused for a while. As ecstatic and as elated as I was still, it was very overwhelming for me to have that change happen so quickly. To go from, you know, walking into a dentist room and immediately seeing 2 or 3 people in the waiting room staring at me, to then going in and they would still look, people still look, but now it's normally only like a glance and then they look away, or they'll look for a couple of seconds and they'll look away. Whereas before, there used to be people really fixated on staring at me, and I hated it. And after the big surgery, that's not really happened much since at all. But for a while, I was still expecting it to happen because it was what I was used to. So that was actually pretty overwhelming. To go through that change in a good way, overwhelming. But it felt very unnatural at times because of what I was used to.
I can imagine it is overwhelming. And like you said, you went from a transformation where people would stare at you and be fixated on it to maybe just having a glance for a couple seconds, but you do recognize that people still look at you. And one of the things that you told me were, no matter where you go in the world, whether it's the Southern Hemisphere, whether it's China, whether it's America, you'll always stand out. And that's a recent conflict that you've had to manage in your brain. Have you thought about that any further?
Yeah, I wouldn't actually call it a conflict. That would be like 17-year-old Rory's worst nightmare. But yeah, if you think about it, because of the way that I look, no matter what street, town, city, country, wherever I go on the planet, literally, I'm going to stand out a bit because I look a bit different to the norm. And it's something that I accepted a long time ago. I accepted that a few years ago, and I've thought about it quite in depth in my own time. But yeah, it's just the way it is. It's a fact. That's just something that I've had to deal with. But again, you know, now going back to me doing a complete 180, I actually like that idea. I like it. I like the idea that, you know, when I go into a nightclub or whatever, I do stand out. But I think that I like that idea because even though I stand out, I'm not shying away from anyone. I'm walking into a room and showing that I'm a confident, outgoing person. It's not as if I'm walking into a room and cowering away in the corner like I used to. So they're seeing someone that's got a birthmark on their face. It looks a bit different, and they're like, "Wow, he's owning it," as you say.
No one can be better at being Rory McGuire than Rory McGuire. Only you have the experiences that you've been through. So the fact that you stand out and have a message and story behind that in a nightclub, it's a great talking point as such as well. Like me and all my mates fit in too nicely. I'm the same shade of shit as everyone else, mate. So I wish I had a unique story like yours sometimes, mate. So we were speaking about nightclubs. I remember you told me this story where you were in the toilet and this gentleman came up to you, absolutely blathered out his face and said to you, "What happened to you? Were you in a fight?" How did you react to that?
Well, I mean, at the time, it wasn't that long after I'd had the surgery, so I was still, as I say, getting used to my new face, if you like, my new life almost. And yeah, I was in the toilet, and yeah, it was absolutely out its face, and I had a good drink in me as well, to be fair. I can't remember the exact sentence and the way that he worded it, but it was something like, you know, has someone battered you, or do you fight? It was something, you know, something along those lines. And that's just to sort of cut away from that just for a moment in time. Since I've had the surgery done, it's actually unbelievable the amount of people that have said, you know, instead of what's wrong with your face, I've had quite a few people saying, do you do boxing? Do you fight? You know, that sort of thing. A lot of people think this is a bruise from fighting, whereas, you know, the way it looked before, nobody really ever thought that. So that's an interesting sort of observation I've made over the past few years. But yeah, he asked me, you know, was I in a fight or whatever? And I said, no, it's a birthmark. You know, I was born with it. It's something I've always had. And he was immediately, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean any offence. And, you know, I was like, no, calm down. You're all right. Like, it's fine. You can ask me whatever you want. But, you know, he immediately felt sympathy for me. And sympathy is the last thing that I want from anyone. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me, because I've got a great life and I'm happy and I'm confident. And, you know, I just want to help other people and inspire and motivate other people. I don't want people feeling sorry that I look this way, because, as I've said, I'm glad that I look this way.
I know you don't like sympathy, mate, and the fact that this man insulted you, quote unquote, and you didn't feel insulted. However, your mood was probably lowered because you had to spend an episode of your night consoling the individual when in in a normal universe, they would be the one consoling you for insulting you. But the fact that you hate
Yeah,
sympathy and this guy had been lowered in terms of mood because he insulted you, it's so strange that
yeah.
you had to console him opposed to the traditional other way around in that kind of situation.
Another, yeah, definitely. And another confliction I had at the time, you know, this honeymoon period for like the sort of like a year after the big operation. Another confliction that I had was, how do I word this? I was very much in the frame of mind of I had this new life, I've got this new face, all the rest of it. I was really happy with how I looked. And then hardly anyone asked about it anymore. Obviously, they see that I look a bit different, but since I've had the operation, I've had minimal questions about it compared to what it used to be like. But the one thing that I did get conflicted with was when someone did ask me about it, for example, in that situation in the nightclub toilets that I'm talking about, when someone did ask about it, um, I did actually feel slightly down for, you know, like an hour or so after it, because I would think to myself, I've had all this done, I'm feeling great, but people are still noticing that I'm different. And I think I was trying to, after the big surgery, I realised that I was trying to maybe stray too far away from my previous story. And,
Mm,
you know, I was maybe thinking that no one's ever going to ask about this again, and, you know, I'll be fine and all the rest of it. But the reality is that I had to accept the fact that even though it's, you know, a lot less drastic in appearance than it used to be, people are still going to ask about it, and that's just something that I've had to accept, and I understand that. But at the time, you know, I was so elated and high on life and experience and all the experiences of the world that I'd wanted for my whole life, that whenever someone did ask about it, it took me a little while to accept it. But now I've got no issue with it at all.
fantastic, mate. So we talk about these kind of fundamental experiences that you might have missed out on or wish that you could have. We speak about going out in nightclubs and stuff like that. I also want to touch on the dating scene. How do you find the
Right.
dating scene? Have you ever experienced any prejudice in the scene?
Not personally, no. I'm a confident, outgoing guy now, and I don't have any struggles or anything, you know, with my self image and stuff like that. But when I was younger, I did. I used to get nervous. I remember one of the first dates that I went on. I think we were planning to meet up in Glasgow at about 7:30 at night, and I got an earlier train up, and I went. I think 6 o'clock, I went and sat in the pool hall underneath Central Station, and I sat and drank 7 double Morgan and Cokes before I even met the girl. And that was for Dutch courage, because I was still going through confidence issues at the time, and you know, I felt like I needed to have a drink to be able to actually have the confidence to go on the date. But that's a lot of years ago, and I don't have any issues at all with my self-image now, and as you say, I own it and I'm confident about it. So I don't need to go and drink litres of rum before I do it anymore.
Litres of rum.
Well, not quite litres, but yeah, I had quite a lot to drink that night, and yeah, I mean, I was very chatty and all the rest of it, and it went well. But yeah, I don't need to hammer the drink anymore the way that I used to build my confidence up, and that's another testament to how far I've come.
I'm so proud of you, mate. And the thing is, like, you must be awesome on a first date. The story that you've got, it's just incredible. Whereas I'm just going on first dates, telling girls about my day and what I've had for lunch. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, I only, another thing is I don't try and shove my story, you know, preach my story all the time. I'll only really open up about it if somebody wants to hear about it. Because another thing is I don't like the feeling of me constantly telling my story to people and, you know, constantly preaching what I went through and all the rest of it. I'd rather only open up about it if someone asks me about it. But again, I'm happy to talk about it.
But that's because you're more than Rory with the birthmark. That's why.
Yeah, thank you.
So, were there any other fundamental experiences or traits or tasks or opportunities that you missed out on because of the way you felt in your teenage years?
No, I think the big thing was really obviously family events, like sort of bigger family events, birthdays, stuff like that. The big thing was the social side of it. You know, those 5 years where I was just staying in the house the whole time, they really affected me. But luckily, I've managed to get through it. And as I say, I've sort of made up for lost time, I suppose. And I think that I'm actually still, I am mature beyond my peers in many ways. But in many ways, I'm still like a little boy. There's certain traits that I've got that are definitely as a result of the lack of socialising in my late teens. I'm very naive in many ways. I realise that, and I'm an intelligent guy, but sometimes I just say things that are so zany that, you know, there's definitely, I can't actually pinpoint everything, but I know that there are definite parts of my personality which are a result of the trauma that I went through, if that makes sense. And those might be things that it'll take me a lot longer to mature in those certain ways, or it might just be something that's with me for the rest of my life because I went through something traumatic at such an early age. But I've accepted it, and for the most part, I'm fine with how I am.
One of the key traits, though, that stand out for me is not just your humility, but your transparency. You're such a transparent human, which takes a huge amount of courage, and it's something that I've only done recently too. What advice would you give to someone who feels perhaps quote unquote different and isn't talking and isn't being transparent? What advice would you give them?
Well, it's a bit difficult because I know that people deal with things in different ways. I used to bottle everything up. My parents didn't know half of what was going on in my head. You know, they really didn't. I was a lot more down than I think I portrayed to them. And to my friends, they didn't know the full extent of what was going on. And I know that there are some people that can't bring themselves to talk about it. It took me many, many years to speak about it as openly as I did initially. So I know that it can take time for a lot of people to do it. But I would say that if there is someone you can talk to about it, whether it's a stranger online or a psychiatrist or a parent or a friend, if you do feel the need to get something off your chest, then give it a go. I mean, when I decided to put that Facebook post up, I was very nervous, and I actually think I delayed putting it up for about 2 weeks. I think I wrote it about 2 weeks before I actually had the courage to put it on, because I thought, I'm saying a lot of stuff here that I've never told anyone, and this is this is like the furthest thing from the way I've been behaving. You know, I've been bottling everything up. I've not been telling anyone anything. And now I'm just going to put it all out there. It took me a couple of weeks to even put the post on. But when I did, what I can say is, as the BBC, the social thing you spoke about earlier, the whole theme of that piece that I did was talking about my experiences changed my life, and it absolutely did. And the way that I've grown since I've started opening up about stuff is, you know, far beyond any comprehension that I had when I was younger. And I do believe that if you are bottling things up, even if you don't want to, I personally think talking about things helps a lot. And I have become very open and transparent, because I also feel like the more I talk about my story, not only does it keep it fresh in my mind, it's also cathartic for me. And you know, if I wasn't to talk about it for years now, that would bother me, because I like sort of refreshing my memory of things, and I like topping up on my story, if you like. Because sometimes I do sit in the house and get emotional and reflect on certain events that happened when I was younger, and maybe feel a bit down about things that I missed out on when I was younger. But then I just have to pick myself back up and say, no, look where you've come, you know. And all that started because of me deciding to talk.
Really love that, mate. It so hammers home the theme of today of the mental health calendar event, Time to Talk. Thank you. Thank you incredibly for that, mate. And it's also so brave that you delayed posting that Facebook post for 2 weeks. The Facebook post that was just your story, yourself. Like, what?
Yeah.
It's crazy that you had to be categorized as brave, or you felt like you were brave just to be you. And it's like, to be transparent, like, that's huge. Like, I can be me, like the taste of my own mouth. I don't need to feel brave to do that. But it just shows you the transition that you've been on, that was a brave step. Whereas now everyone just posts themselves online without even having to think of that. And now you feel comfortable and confident enough to just be yourself and echo your story, mate. So I hope you're proud of that. I really do.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad that shows.
It shows a lot, mate. So you overcame adversity, which seemed in the form of Mount Everest for you, being able to tell your story. What else do you want to achieve, mate?
Well, you know, this is a very big ambition, but I'm confident that, you know, I want to be one of the people in the world that sparks a change for prejudice becoming a thing of the past. Now, I don't think prejudice is ever going to be fully eradicated, but I do believe it starts from parents teaching their kids from a young age not to show any prejudice or be disrespectful towards people that look different or people that are from any sort of different walk of life. I do believe that I believe that people aren't born prejudiced. You know, it's a trait that's taught. I don't think it's a trait you're born with.
100%.
And if you teach your children not to be wary of people that look different to yourself, or not to treat them any differently, then, you know, they're going to grow up having those values, that they're not going to put anyone through that sort of nonsense that I went through and that a lot of people go through still on a daily basis. And I want to be one of the people that keeps telling their story, keeps trying to do as many things as possible to show that prejudice is a bad thing to put anyone through. And I'm confident that I can be one of the people that really makes his mark and helps to change the planet for the better.
I'm confident too. So what's coming up this year for Rory?
So there's actually a sculpture that got started last February. I was going down to London every 2 weeks for a sculptor called Marcus Cornish. He's a really well-known sculptor. He's sculpted quite a few well-known pieces in London, like Paddington Bear and Paddington Station. He sculpted that. And there's a couple other really well-known ones in London. He's doing a sculpture of my head and shoulders, and he's doing a sculpture of another Changing Faces campaigner, Ella. He's doing a sculpture of her. So we were going down every couple of weeks to London last week for him to start it. Then the lockdown happened. So I've had a few Zoom sessions with him. So he's been doing a few Zoom sessions. And I think he's working on the sculpture at home now. So I'm looking forward. I mean, hopefully I'll be able to get down to London at some point this year to to be presented with it or what have you. I think that's going to be displayed at some sort of event at one of the National Gallery or something like that. So that's something that I've got coming up. I've got a friend, Connor Bell. Him and I are talking about starting a podcast and being one of your competition.
Good luck, mate. Good luck.
We'll need it. We've been talking recently about we'd both like to do it, and we're both pals, and we think we'd be good co-hosts, I suppose. So
I think you will.
We're talking about maybe doing that when we can get up to Glasgow and rent a studio space or whatever, hopefully later this year. And then
you don't need any of that, mate.
Oh well, yeah. No, I can see what you're working with, but we're thinking, yeah, we could do it either way. But we're thinking about doing something in some capacity of a podcast. So we'll see what happens with that.
I can't wait.
And yeah, Changing Faces that I do a lot of stuff with, and a charity called Humanity that I'm also an ambassador of. They've always got stuff going on, so I'm sure that when restrictions are eased and stuff like that, we can crack on with some more campaigns. So I'm looking forward to that.
Me too, mate. Where can the people join you in your advocacy and your journey?
So you can just look me up on social media, Rory McGuire, Instagram and Twitter. I use Instagram the most, but I've got a Twitter as well. My ID is VM Rory 1993. It stands for Venus Malformation. My birthmark VM, and then Rory 1993.
I'll make sure to link them in the show notes below, mate. So thanks for coming on and sparing your time today and inspiring not just me but the listeners. Thanks even more so
Thanks for having me.
Oh mate, it's a pleasure. Like, you're a paragon of a case study that exemplifies the importance of time to talk. You've changed lives and you're going to go on and change even more. You're going to hit that North Star. I'm going to say congratulations now for doing that because I know it's going to happen. But mate, just thank you for coming on. It's been so emotional. It's been so important. The listeners are undoubtedly going to be taking a new, fresh perspective from your story, mate. Honestly, it's been an emotional roller coaster. Thank you. I'm so grateful.
Thanks, David. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Speak soon, mate.
Speak to you soon.